In 1958, a construction worker in Northern California arrived at his bulldozer one morning and found something that would change his life and the lives of thousands of people who came after him. Around the machine, pressed deep into the soft earth, were footprints. Each one was 16 inches long. Each one was shaped like a human foot but twice as wide, with 5 toes and a deep heel strike that told whoever looked at them that whatever had made them was very, very heavy. The worker's name was Jerry Crew. He made a cast of one of the prints in plaster and drove it to the local newspaper. The newspaper ran the story, and the world gave the creature a name it has never lost: Bigfoot. Tonight we tell the whole story, from the beginning. Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Science Facts channel. Tonight we will be drifting into one of the greatest mysteries in the history of human curiosity. A mystery that has never been solved. A mystery that has produced some of the most compelling evidence, some of the most spectacular hoaxes, and some of the most serious and credible scientific debate of any unknown subject in the modern era. The story of Bigfoot is not simply the story of a creature. It is a story of what happens when something refuses to be either proved or disproved for over a century. It is a story of the forests of North America and the indigenous peoples who knew them long before any European arrived. It is a story of what science is willing to consider and what it is not. It is a story of the human mind and its deep need to believe that something enormous and unknown is still out there in the dark between the trees. And most importantly tonight, it is told calmly, carefully, and completely at a pace that lets every piece of the story settle before the next one arrives. Whether you believe or you do not, the story is extraordinary, and it begins much, much earlier than 1958. If you enjoy these gentle journeys, I invite you to like, subscribe, or share a thought below. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. But for now, all you need to do is relax. Let your body soften and allow your breathing to slow and allow the day to gently fade away as we explore the mystery of Bigfoot together. Let's begin. Long before Jerry Crew found his footprints, long before any camera had ever been pointed at a forest, long before the name Bigfoot existed in any language, the indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest, the Great Plains, and the forests of the eastern seaboard were telling stories about a large, hair-covered, human-like creature that walked the deep wilderness on 2 legs. These stories were not campfire entertainment or the invention of idle imagination. They were considered by the people who told them to be accounts of a real being, as real as the bear and the elk and the salmon, that shared the landscape with human communities and had its own place in the spiritual and ecological understanding of those communities. The STSAL people of British Columbia called it Sasquatch, which is a root of the word Sasquatch. The Lummi people of Washington state had their own name and their own tradition surrounding the creature. The Lakota Sioux of the Great Plains spoke of Chiatanka, the big elder brother. The Ojibwe of the Great Lakes region had accounts of a large, solitary, forest-dwelling being that avoided human contact but was occasionally encountered. The Iroquois Confederacy, spanning a vast territory of the northeastern woodlands, maintained oral traditions of a similar creature across multiple member nations. The consistency of these accounts across cultures that had no contact with each other, spanning thousands of kilometers of diverse landscape, has been noted by researchers as significant in a way that simple myth and legend cannot easily explain. Stories travel between connected cultures. Stories do not spontaneously generate the same specific details across unconnected civilizations independently. The hair-covered bipedal giant of the North American wilderness was being described in independent traditions from coast to coast, and those descriptions matched each other in their essential features, long before any European ever wrote a single word about it. The earliest documented accounts by European settlers and explorers are scattered through the colonial period and the early history of the American and Canadian frontier in ways that were largely ignored until researchers began systematically collecting them in the 20th century. David Thompson, the British-Canadian explorer who mapped vast portions of North America in the early 19th century, recorded in his journal of 1811 the discovery of large, human-like footprints in the snow near what is now Jasper, Alberta. He described the prints as measuring 14 inches in length and 8 inches in width, and noted that he had no explanation for them. The log of a Hudson's Bay Company trading post in the same region from a few years earlier contained similar accounts from trappers and traders who reported encounters with a large, dark, upright figure in the forests. Reports from Gold Rush, California in the 1850s included accounts of miners in remote mountain camps hearing screams in the night and finding large footprints around their camps in the morning. In 1884, A Victoria, British Columbian newspaper reported the capture of what it described as a gorilla-like creature near Yale, a being that was described as between 4 and 5 feet tall, covered in glossy black hair, enormously strong, and capable of walking upright with ease. The account, whether entirely accurate or embellished, represents the first widely circulated English-language newspaper report of a creature matching the description that would later become associated with Bigfoot. By the turn of the 20th century, accounts of large bipedal creatures in the forests of the Pacific Northwest were sufficiently common that they were no longer individually remarkable to those living in the region, even if they were entirely unknown to the wider world. Let your breathing settle into the quiet. There is no urgency to this story. It has been building for centuries, and it can take its time tonight. The 1958 Bluff Creek incident that gave the world the name Bigfoot was not the beginning of the story in the region. 4 years before Jerry Crew's discovery, road construction crews working in the remote Bluff Creek watershed of Humboldt County, California, had been reporting strange events. Equipment was moved overnight. Oil drums too heavy for any person to lift were found repositioned. Footprints appeared around the construction sites in the mornings that no one working on the project had made. The supervisor of the project, a man named Ray Wallace, and his workers discussed what might be causing these events without reaching any satisfactory conclusion. When the story finally broke in the Humboldt Times, accompanied by Jerry Crew's plaster cast, it was immediately picked up by wire services and circulated nationally and internationally. The name Bigfoot, coined by the newspaper's editor as a headline shorthand for the creature that made such large prints, became permanently attached to the mystery. Thousands of people contacted the paper with their own accounts. Researchers began arriving in Northern California to investigate, and a phenomenon that had been part of the interior life of indigenous and rural communities for generations was suddenly thrust into the glare of national media attention, where it would remain for the rest of the 20th century and beyond. Ray Wallace, it should be noted, was later revealed by his family after his death in 2002 to have fabricated at least some of the Bluff Creek tracks using carved wooden feet. Whether this fabrication accounts for all of the Bluff Creek evidence, or whether Wallace was adding artificial tracks to an area where some genuine prints had already appeared, remains a matter of debate among researchers. Wallace's hoax did not end the story. It complicated it, which is in many ways a defining feature of the entire Bigfoot phenomenon. The Patterson-Gimlin film, shot on the 16th of October 1967 at Bluff Creek, California, is the most scrutinized piece of footage in the history of cryptozoology, and the debate about its authenticity has never reached a definitive conclusion accepted by all parties. Roger Patterson, a rodeo rider and aspiring filmmaker who had written a book about Bigfoot in 1966, and his friend Bob Gimlin were on horseback in the Bluff Creek area when, according to their account, they rounded a bend in the creek and encountered a large, dark, hair-covered figure walking upright along the sandy bank. Patterson's horse reared. He dismounted, grabbed his 16mm camera from his slow bag, and ran toward the figure, filming as he went. The resulting footage, running for approximately 59.5 seconds, shows a large bipedal figure covered in dark brown hair walking with a distinctive swinging stride and turning at one point to look directly at the camera. The creature, if it is a creature, has been estimated from the film to be approximately 2¼ meters tall, and between 120 and 280 kilograms in weight, depending on the assumptions used in the calculation. The most analyzed frame of the film, frame 352, shows the subject turning to look at the camera, and the image of that face, whatever it belongs to, has become one of the most reproduced and recognized images in the entire history of the unknown. In the decades since the film was shot, it has been examined by film analysts, biomechanics experts, costume designers, special effect professionals, primate researchers, and forensic investigators. The analysts who believe it is a hoax argue that a person in a costume could reproduce the movement, the proportions, and the gait visible in the film. The analysts who believe it is genuine argue that no costume technology available in 1967 could have produced the muscle movement, the fluid hip motion, the proportions, and particularly the apparent definition of muscle groups moving under the hair that are visible in high-resolution analysis of the film. Bob Gimlin, now in his 90s, has maintained consistently throughout his entire adult life that what he and Patterson filmed that day was real. Roger Patterson died of cancer in 1972, maintaining the same position until his death. The physical evidence gathered over more than 60 years of active investigation includes not only thousands of footprint casts from dozens of locations across the Pacific Northwest, the Sierra Nevada, the Rocky Mountains, the Appalachians, and many other areas, but also hair samples, audio recordings, visual sightings, thermal imaging footage, and tree structures that investigators attribute to the creature. The footprint evidence is the most extensive and the most studied. The casts collected by researchers over decades show a range of foot sizes from 12 to 22 inches in length, with a consistent set of features that differ from human footprints in specific ways. The foot is typically wider in proportion to its length than a human foot. There is evidence in many casts of a mid-tarsal break, a flexibility in the middle of the foot not present in modern humans, but present in some non-human primates and in the footprint of ancient hominids. The dermal ridges, the fine lines analogous to fingerprints that are present on the soles of human feet, are visible in some casts with resolution that would be extremely difficult to fake. The late Jeffrey Meldrum, a professor of anatomy and anthropology at Idaho State University and one of the few credentialed academics who has engaged seriously and publicly with the Bigfoot evidence, has argued that the consistency and anatomical detail of the footprint evidence across thousands of specimens from multiple independent sources over many decades is more consistent with a real biological entity than with an extended hoax. Not all of his colleagues agree, and his engagement with the subject has not been without professional cost, but his analysis of the evidence has been careful, methodical, and published in peer-reviewed contexts where it can be evaluated on its merits. Now let the story settle for a moment. Let the darkness of the room be complete and comfortable. The forests we are talking about tonight are vast and dark and largely unexplored, and they have kept their secrets for a very long time. There is no need to rush. The Skookum cast is one of the most unusual pieces of Bigfoot evidence ever collected, and the circumstances of its discovery and the subsequent analysis of it represent some of the most serious scientific engagement the subject has ever received. In September of 2000, a team of researchers from the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization placed a pool of fruit and food attractants in a muddy meadow at Skookum Meadow in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest in Washington state, intending to attract wildlife and potentially a Bigfoot to leave footprints in the soft mud. The next morning, they found not footprint but a large impression in the mud suggesting that a very large creature had lain on its side to reach the fruit, leaving impressions of its forearm, hip, thigh, and heel. A plaster cast was made of the entire impression, measuring nearly 1.5 meters in length. The cast was subsequently examined by a number of scientists, including primatologists and anthropologists with no prior engagement with the Bigfoot community. Several of these researchers, examining the cast without knowing its claimed provenance, noted anatomical features consistent with a large primate, including what appeared to be hair impressions, dermal ridges on the heel, and proportions inconsistent with any known North American wildlife. A paper discussing the cast was presented at a scientific conference, making it one of the very few times that Bigfoot physical evidence has been formally presented in an academic setting. Skeptics have proposed that the impression was made by a large elk lying in the mud, and the debate about the cast's origin has not been resolved. But the serious engagement of credentialed researchers with the evidence, willing to examine it on its merits rather than dismiss it on principle, represents a departure from the typical academic silence on the subject. The question of what Bigfoot could biologically be, if it exists, has been considered by researchers from several angles, and the most scientifically credible candidates draw on the genuine fossil record of large primates to frame the possibility. The most widely discussed candidate is Gigantopithecus blacki, a large extinct ape that lived in Southeast Asia from approximately 9 million years ago until as recently as 100,000 years ago, making it effectively contemporary of early modern humans in Asia. Gigantopithecus is known almost entirely from fossilized teeth and jaw bones, which are the only parts of its skeleton that have been recovered, and these fragments indicate an animal of extraordinary size, estimated by researchers at between 200 and 500 kilograms and between 2 and 3 meters in height, comparable to the size estimates for Bigfoot. Whether Gigantopithecus were bipedal is unknown, since no limb bones have ever been found, but its size and the time period of its extinction raise the question of whether a population could have crossed a land bridge that connected Asia and North America during the Ice Ages and establish itself in the North American forests. This hypothesis has been proposed by several researchers and dismissed by others on the grounds that the geographic and temporal overlap between Gigantopithecus and the North American continent is poorly supported by the fossil evidence. A more recent possibility raised by genetic discoveries is the Denisovans, an archaic human lineage known primarily from genetic material extracted from a finger bone found in Siberia, who are now known to have interbred with modern humans across Asia and Pacific, and whose full geographic range and physical characteristics remain largely unknown. Whether either of these candidates could account for Bigfoot, or whether the creature, if real, represents something entirely new to science, is a question that cannot be answered without biological material of sufficient quality for genetic analysis. The scientific establishment's insistent refusal to take the Bigfoot question seriously has frustrated researchers who believe the evidence warrants investigation and delighted skeptics who see the absence of formal scientific engagement as confirmation that there is nothing to engage with. The argument from skeptics is straightforward and, on its face, compelling. North America has been extensively surveyed, mapped, photographed, and traversed for centuries. Wildlife biologists track and monitor every significant animal population on the continent using camera traps, radio collars, DNA sampling, aerial surveys, and population modeling. If a large primate population existed in the forests of North America, it would have been detected by these methods. No body of Bigfoot has ever been produced. No skeleton, no bone, no tooth, no confirmed biological sample of any kind has been scientifically verified as belonging to an unknown primate. The silence of the physical record, after more than a century of searching, is the most powerful argument against Bigfoot's existence. The counter-argument, offered by proponents, points to the enormous size and genuinely impenetrable density of the forest in question, particularly in the Pacific Northwest and the coastal ranges of British Columbia and Alaska, where hundreds of thousands of square kilometers of old-growth forests have barely been entered by humans. It points to the mountain gorilla, unknown to Western science until 1902, and the giant squid, not photographed alive until 2004. It points to the coelacanth, considered extinct for 65 million years until a living specimen was caught off the coast of South Africa in 1938. Science has been wrong about the existence of large animals before, and the argument that absence of evidence is evidence of absence applies less comfortably to environments as remote and as unexplored as the coastal rainforests of the Pacific Northwest than it does to more accessible terrain. Let the quiet of the room hold you a little more deeply now. The story we are in is not a frightening one. It is a mystery, and mysteries at night, told quietly and carefully, are among the most peaceful things a mind can rest inside. Among the most compelling and least easily dismissed accounts in the entire history of Bigfoot reports is the story of Albert Ostman, a Canadian prospector who claimed in 1957 to have been abducted by a family of Sasquatch while prospecting near Toba Inlet in British Columbia in 1924. Ostman maintained for the rest of his life that he was asleep in his sleeping bag when he was picked up, still in the bag, and carried for several hours through the forest before being deposited in a small valley where a family of 4 Sasquatch, an adult male, an adult female, a young male, and a young female, were living. He claimed to have been held there for 6 days, during which the creatures fed him and interacted with him, before he escaped by feeding the adult male a tin of snuff that caused the creature distress and created a distraction. Ostman's account, taken decades after the alleged event and described with a level of specific, behavioral, and anatomical detail that skeptics argue is inconsistent with fabrication, was considered by John Green, one of the most rigorous and methodical Bigfoot researchers of the 20th century, to be one of the most credible witness accounts in his extensive collection. Whether it is true cannot be established at this remove, but the specific details Ostman provided about the creature's diet, their social dynamics, their vocalizations, their physical proportions, and their method of sleeping, many of which independently match details provided by other witnesses who had no access to Ostman's account, have never been fully accounted for by those who dismiss it as fabrication. The recorded sounds attributed to Bigfoot are the most haunting and the most difficult to categorically explain of all the non-visual evidence. In 1994, a man named Ron Moorhead and his companions were camped in a remote area of the Sierra Nevada mountains of California when they recorded a series of vocalizations on a standard cassette tape recorder that have since become known as the Sierra Sounds. The recordings, captured over multiple nights and multiple seasons across several years, include a range of sounds that have no clear identification among known North American wildlife. Some sounds are deep, resonant, and incredibly powerful, suggesting a chest cavity far larger than any known North American animal capable of producing vocalization. Others include what appears to be a form of structured, sequential sound that some linguists and primatologists who have examined the recordings have described as exhibiting a complexity consistent with language-like communication, including what one linguist at a major American university described as apparent morphological structure, meaning apparent units of meaning embedded in a stream of sound rather than the simple repetition of call patterns found in known animals. The linguist in question, R. Scott Nelson, a retired military cryptolinguist with training in the analysis of unknown languages, published an analysis of the Sierra sounds in which he argued that they contain a non-human language with identifiable phonemes and morphological patterns. His analysis has been disputed, but the recordings themselves have never been identified as belonging to any known animal. They remain, like so much of the Bigfoot evidence, officially unexplained. The history of confirmed hoaxes and the Bigfoot phenomenon is extensive, and being honest about it is essential to understanding the subject fairly. Ray Wallace's wooden feet at Bluff Creek. Bob Hieronymus, who claimed in 2004 to have been the man in the suit in the Patterson-Gimlin film, though his claim has been disputed by biomechanics researchers who argue that no suit available in 1967 could replicate the movements visible in the film. The two Georgia men, Matt Witten and Rick Dyer, who in 2008 announced the discovery of a Bigfoot body, held a press conference and sold their story to a media company, only to be revealed days later to have presented a rubber Halloween costume stuffed into a freezer. The Minnesota Iceman, a figure encased in a block of ice displayed at carnivals in the late 1960s, which appeared to be a large, hairy, human-like body, and which was examined by two respected zoologists who initially believed it to be genuine before the owner replaced it with an obvious rubber replica and denied scientists further access. Every hoax in the Bigfoot canon has done damage to the subject credibility, and the cumulative effect of decades of fabrications is a cultural landscape in which serious engagement with the evidence by credentialed scientists carries significant professional risk. Yet the existence of hoaxes does not, by itself, establish that all the evidence is false. Hoaxes take the subject seriously enough to fake evidence, which implies there is something worth faking. The question of what is genuine in the Bigfoot record, after the hoaxes are identified and removed, remains genuinely open. Rest here for a moment. Let the weight of your body settle completely into wherever you are lying. The forests are dark tonight, as they always are, and whatever is or is not in them is going about its business in the dark, as it always has. In 2012, a team of researchers led by Dr. Melba Ketchum, a veterinary geneticist in Texas, announced that they had completed a 5-year study of over 100 biological samples submitted by Bigfoot researchers from across North America, and that the DNA analysis of those samples had produced extraordinary results. Ketchum's team reported that the samples showed genetic signatures consistent with a novel hominin, a member of the human family, with a mitochondrial DNA sequence fully consistent with modern human females, but a nuclear DNA sequence that was highly unusual and unlike any known primate. They interpreted this as evidence of a hybridization event approximately 15,000 years ago between a modern human female and an unknown male hominin of non-human origin, producing a lineage that persisted in the forests of North America to the present day. The paper was published in a journal called the De Novo Journal of Science, which had been created specifically for the publication of this paper after it had been rejected by numerous peer-reviewed journals, and this aspect of the publication has been a primary focus of criticism. Mainstream geneticists who reviewed the paper raised serious concerns about contamination of the samples with human DNA, the methodology of the analysis, and the scientific rigor of the conclusions. The paper is not considered credible by mainstream genetics. Whether this is because it is genuinely flawed science or because the subject matter makes objective evaluation impossible in the current scientific climate is itself a point of debate among those who follow the field closely. The cultural significance of Bigfoot in the United States and Canada extends far beyond the question of whether the creature is real, and understanding this cultural dimension is essential to understanding why the story has persisted and grown rather than fading as the decades pass. Bigfoot occupies a unique psychological space in North American culture, representing something that the rational, mapped, surveyed, and categorized landscape of the modern world cannot account for. It is a shadow at the edge of the cleared land, the reminder that the forest is older and larger and darker than any human project, the suggestion that there is still something genuinely unknown within reach. In a culture that has landed on the moon and sequenced the human genome and mapped the floor of every ocean, the possibility that a large primate is still walking the forests of the Pacific Northwest undetected is not simply an anomaly. It is a provocation. It insists that the world is not fully known, that science has not finished its work, that the map still has edges. This is deeply uncomfortable for some people and deeply comforting for others, and the persistence of Bigfoot in the popular imagination reflects the persistence of the human desire to live in a world that still contains genuine mystery. The enormous output of documentaries, reality television series, books, films, and online communities devoted to the subject is not simply entertainment. It is a cultural symptom, and what it reveals about the psychological needs of the culture that produces it is at least as interesting as any piece of physical evidence. The indigenous relationship with a creature they know as Sasquatch is a dimension of the Bigfoot story that is frequently oversimplified or ignored in popular treatments of the subject, and its complexity deserves more careful attention. For many indigenous nations of the Pacific Northwest, the Sasquatch is not a cryptid, not a mystery to be solved by science, not a missing animal species waiting to be catalogued. It is a being with its own spiritual significance and its own place in the relational framework through which indigenous peoples understand the living world. Some nations consider the Sasquatch a relative, a being that occupies a position between the human and the non-human, and encounters with it are understood in terms of spiritual relationship rather than biological discovery. Some nations maintain that the Sasquatch is not always visible to physical perception, that it can move between states of visibility in ways that explain why physical evidence of it is so inconsistent and so difficult to obtain. This perspective is entirely outside the framework that Western science uses to evaluate evidence, which is precisely why it tends to be either dismissed or romanticized rather than engaged with seriously. Yet the people who hold these traditions have been observing the forests of the Pacific Northwest for thousands of years longer than any Western scientists, and their knowledge of those forests, their plants, their animals, and their ecological relationships has repeatedly proved to be more detailed and more accurate than anything available from scientific surveys. The indigenous relationship with the Sasquatch does not resolve the question of its existence, but it provides a context and a depth to the story that renders the simple binary of real or hoax entirely inadequate. The technology available to Bigfoot researchers has improved dramatically in the 21st century, and the application of trail cameras, environmental DNA analysis, acoustic monitoring, and drone surveillance to the search has produced both new evidence and new frustrations. Trail cameras, deployed by the thousands by wildlife researchers and hunters across the forests of North America, have documented virtually every significant wildlife species on the continent in unprecedented detail. Wolves, mountain lions, bears, elk, and dozens of smaller species are captured routinely on trail cameras in the same forest where Bigfoot sightings are reported. The fact that not a single unambiguous image of a Bigfoot has been produced by any trail camera anywhere, despite the hundreds of thousands of cameras deployed across the subject purported range, is a significant data point that is difficult to explain away. Environmental DNA, or EDNA, analysis, which allows researchers to detect the presence of animals in an environment by analyzing the genetic material they shed into the water, soil, and air, has been applied to several locations with high concentrations of Bigfoot reports. A study published in 2014 by a team from Oxford University and the Lausanne Museum of Zoology analyzed hair samples submitted by Bigfoot and Yeti researchers from around the world and found that all the matched known animal species, primarily bears, though with 2 samples from the Himalayas showing an unusual match to an ancient lineage of polar bear that raised questions about an unknown bear species in Asia. No North American sample matched an unknown primate. The absence of Bigfoot from the EDNA and trail camera record is the strongest scientific argument against its existence in the forms and numbers suggested by the witness accounts, and it is an argument that proponents of Bigfoot's existence have not yet provided a fully satisfying response to. Now let the night be complete around you. There is no conclusion to force tonight. The mystery is still open, and an open mystery at night, held in the dark without the pressure of resolution, is one of the most restful things a mind can rest inside. The most recent chapter in the Bigfoot story involves figures who are harder to dismiss than the carnival showmen and rural hoaxes of the earlier decades. Rick Dyer, who claimed to have shot and killed a Bigfoot in 2012, produced a body that was quickly identified as another fabricated prop and admitted to the hoax, damaging his own credibility irreparably. But other figures in the contemporary Bigfoot landscape include retired military officers, professional wildlife biologists, and law enforcement personnel who have filed sighting reports and stand by them. The Olympic Project, a research group operating in the Olympic Peninsula of Washington state, has deployed an extensive network of trail cameras and audio recorders and has produced recordings and observations that its members consider significant. Cliff Barackman, a former educator and Bigfoot researcher whose measured and methodical approach to the evidence has earned him respect even among skeptics, has spent decades collecting and cataloging footprint casts and citing reports in a manner that prioritizes accuracy over sensationalism. The researcher Daniel Perez has published a newsletter called the Bigfoot Times since the 1980s that has maintained rigorous standard of evidence evaluation and honest reporting on the state of the evidence. The existence of careful, methodical, credentialed researchers who have spent decades evaluating the evidence and continue to believe that something real underlies it does not prove that Bigfoot exists. But it does complicate the narrative that only credulous, sensation-seeking, or dishonest people find the evidence worth taking seriously. The Yeti of the Himalayas, the Yowie of Australia, the Almas of Central Asia, the Orang Pendek of Sumatra, and the Yeren of China are all regional versions of the same basic phenomenon, a large, hair-covered, bipedal figure reported by local populations across a range of cultures and environments spanning the globe. The cross-cultural universality of the large bipedal hairy hominid report is one of the most intriguing aspects of the entire phenomenon, and one that a simple hoax hypothesis struggles to account for. The Orang Pendek of Sumatra, described as a small, upright walking primate approximately 1.5 meters tall with reddish-brown hair, has been reported by the indigenous people of Sumatra for centuries and has been encountered by Western naturalists and researchers on multiple occasions. In 2001, a team led by the researcher Deborah Mata recovered footprints and hair samples from Sumatra that were submitted for analysis. The hair samples were identified as potentially primate in origin, but not matching any known primate species by the researchers who examined them. The Orang Pendek inhabits an island whose wildlife is still being actively catalogued, where new species of mammals are discovered with some regularity, and where the dense forest cover and difficult terrain provide genuine scope for an unknown primate to remain undocumented. Whether the Orang Pendek is the best candidate among the world's unknown hominids for formal scientific confirmation, or whether all of these regional variants represent the same fundamental category of misidentification and fabrication, is a question that the evidence available does not yet allow to be definitively answered. The deepest question embedded in the Bigfoot story is not whether the creature is real. It is why the human mind, across cultures and centuries and continents, insists on placing something like it at the edge of the forest. There is a version of the Bigfoot story that has nothing to do with biology and everything to do with psychology, specifically with the psychology of the boundary between the human world and the wild world, and the need many people feel for something to inhabit that boundary. The forest has always been the place in human consciousness where the known ends and the unknown begins, where the rules of the village do not apply and where the unpredictable power of nature becomes immediate and personal. Every culture in every era has populated the forest's edge with beings that are human enough to be unsettling and non-human enough to be dangerous, from the satyrs and centaurs of Greek mythology to the jinn of Islamic tradition to the wild man of medieval European folklore, the enormous, hairy, forest-dwelling figure who predates any specific Bigfoot account by thousands of years. The wild man was a recurring figure in European folklore and art throughout the medieval period, depicted in illuminated manuscripts, carved into church misericords, and described in travelers' accounts as a creature that was almost human, but had crossed over some threshold into something else. Whether these traditions represent garbled accounts of genuine encounters with unknown primates in Eurasia, psychological archetypes expressing the boundary between culture and nature, or simply the universal human need to put something in the dark beyond the firelight, no one has definitively established. The Bigfoot story is, among many other things, the latest chapter in a very old story, and the fact that the story persists in the most technologically sophisticated culture in human history suggests that whatever need it meets is not one that technology is capable of satisfying. The forest at night is among the most ancient and most settling of all the sounds and images the human mind can rest inside. The scale of what we are talking about when we talk about the forest where Bigfoot is reported is easy to underestimate. The old-growth temperate rainforests of the Pacific Northwest, the coastal ranges of British Columbia and southeastern Alaska, the dense boreal forests of the Canadian interior, the high country forests of Sierra Nevada and the Cascades, taken together represent one of the largest areas of relatively intact wilderness remaining on Earth. The Tungas National Forest in Alaska alone covers 17 million acres, larger than the state of West Virginia. Within these forests, there are valleys that have never been entered by any person in recorded history, river drainages that have never been walked, mountain flanks that receive so little human traffic that a large animal could pass through them year after year without ever encountering a camera trap or a human observer. The argument from absence, that absence of evidence proves absence of the creature, applies less forcefully to terrain of this character than it would anywhere more accessible. It does not establish that Bigfoot is there, but it maintains the conditions under which Bigfoot could be there, and the difference between those two positions is a space that the mystery continues to inhabit, decade after decade, report after report, cast after cast, with no definitive resolution in sight. The night is very deep now. Let the trees stand in their darkness. Let the forest be what it is, vast and dark and patient, keeping whatever it keeps in the way that old forests do, without explaining themselves to anyone. You are warm and still and at rest, and the forest is as it has always been, and the mystery is as it has always been, and both of them will be exactly the same tomorrow. What do we actually know after everything? We know that the indigenous peoples of North America have described a large bipedal creature in the forest for centuries, independently and consistently, in traditions that predate any contact with European culture. We know that thousands of people across more than a century have reported seeing a large, hair-covered, bipedal figure in the forests of North America, many of them trained observers with no apparent motive for fabrication. We know that thousands of footprints have been collected, many of them exhibiting anatomical features are difficult to account for with known hoaxing techniques. We know that recordings have been made of vocalizations that have not been identified as belonging to any known species. We know that multiple credentialed researchers who have engaged with the evidence seriously over careers of decades continue to believe that something real underlies it. And we know that no body, no skeleton, no bone, no confirmed biological sample, and no unambiguous photograph has ever been produced or verified. The mystery is genuinely unresolved. It has been genuinely unresolved for 100 years. And the most honest thing that can be said about it is that the evidence is insufficient to confirm the creature's existence and insufficient to rule it out, and that this is an unusual position for a biological question to remain in after a century of investigation, in a country with the scientific resources and the surveying capability of the United States. The forest is large. The evidence is real, in the sense that it exists and requires explanation. The explanation remains unknown. And in a world that is mapped and catalogued and documented to an extraordinary degree, that is a remarkable thing to be able to say. And so we drift gently back from the edge of the forest, carrying with us a quiet weight of everything we have visited tonight. We began in 1958 with a plaster cast press in California mud, and traced the story all the way back to the indigenous peoples who knew the creature by other names in other centuries. We examined the Patterson-Gimlin film and found it neither proven nor disproven after 50 years of analysis by everyone from primate biologists to Hollywood special effects artists. We held the Sierra Sounds recordings in our minds and found no clean category to place them in. We walked through the forest where the trail cameras have captured every bear and elk and mountain lion and found the absence of their quarry both significant and insufficient. We met the researchers who had devoted careers to the question and found them neither fools nor fraudsters, but careful people sitting with evidence that the mainstream will not examine and conclusions that cannot yet be confirmed. We understood that the Bigfoot story is not simply a question about an animal. It is a question about what the human mind requires from the world it lives in, and about whether the world still has enough mystery left in it to meet that requirement. The forests are dark and large and old, and they have not given up all of their secrets yet. Whether one of those secrets walks on two legs is a question that the forest has not yet decided to answer. But the asking of it, tonight, in the dark, is its own kind of restful. Some questions are not meant to be resolved. They are meant to be carried, lightly, and without urgency, through the dark, exactly the way you are carrying this one now. If you enjoyed this sleepy journey, you can support the channel by liking, subscribing, or leaving a calm little comment before you rest. It helps more curious minds find their way here. And if you are still awake, there's another video waiting on your screen, ready to carry you onward into another corner of science. But for now, let the questions loosen their grip. Let your shoulders soften. Let your jaw unclench. Allow your breathing to slow, steady, and deepen. Picture an old forest at night, the kind that has been standing for 500 years, the kind where the canopy is so dense that on a moonless night the ground is in absolute darkness. The trees are standing the way they always stand, indifferent to whether anyone is watching. The forest floor is alive with small sounds, the movements of small things, the settling of old wood. And somewhere, in the distance, there may or may not be something large and dark and quiet, moving between the trees on two legs, going about its business in the way it has always done, in a darkness older than any name that has ever been given to it. You do not need to resolve that tonight. You only need rest. Sleep well, and good night.